been a lot of buzz over the last few weeks about strange sounds being heard in the atmosphere. People around the world and here at home have reported hearing some bizarre noises.
Some strange noises heard around the world the last few weeks has people buzzing, especially on YouTube. Clips posted from Arizona to England and right next door in Manitoba, all showing folks alarmed by what sounds like a noise straight out of a science fiction flick. Some strange noises heard around the world the last few weeks.
There is now audio proof.
Then God caused a sign to appear in the heavens, so that men should know the earth would be afflicted, and the sign was a strange star. The star grew and waxed to a great brightness, and was awesome to behold. It put forth horns and sang, being unlike any other ever seen. These were days of ominous calm, when the people waited for they knew not what. The days of stillness were followed by a time when the noise of trumpeting and shrilling was heard in the heavens. The people will scatter in madness. They will hear the trumpet and battle cry of the destroyer. They will seek refuge within dens in the earth. Terror will eat away their hearts, and their courage will flow from them like water from a broken pitcher. They will be eaten up in the flames of wrath and consumed by the breath of the destroyer.
But he will not win, no he will lose. Christ will drop him, then he'll reboot. The heavens and the earth, everything's new. The city's walls and gold streets will be see-through. A tree of healing for the nations, we will eat the fruit. No sun, no stars in the green room, just the glory of God in his people. No pain, no sorrow, no evil. No death, no tomorrow, no creed, dude. No shame, no boredom, no seas blue. Dear Lord, I don't know when I'ma see you, but I can't wait, and I pray that it'll be soon. You hear that like a flash, you hear that thunder roll. Can't wait to Christ is back, this song should come to close. Who broke the righteous path, who had a love of those? This ain't to Christ, relax, yeah, when that trumpet blows. When that trumpet blows, yeah, when that trumpet blows. When that trumpet blows, yeah, when that trumpet blows. When that trumpet blows, yeah, when that trumpet blows. This ain't to Christ, relax, yeah, when that trumpet blows.
first understand what it is we're trying to define. Now, most Christians I've asked, I will say, would you please tell me what is a rapture?
Mm-hmm.
And they tell me, I mean, I don't know how many have answered this the same way. Well, that's when Jesus Christ is coming in the cloud and take us off the earth, and we'll meet him in the air, and he takes us to heaven. And I'm going, yes, that's absolutely right. But I didn't ask you that question. I asked you, what is a rapture, not what is the next rapture.
And that's what's different about this.
Well, yes.
Because we all assume there is one and only one.
That's
the rapture.
Problem.
And you're saying there's
more. There's a
more.
lot more. When we identify and define what makes a rapture a rapture. And it's three simple little things.
Mm-hmm.
God physically removes those whom he declares to be righteous outside of his impending judgment. That's it. There's
God
nothing more.
physically removes those whom he declares to be righteous
outside
of his impending judgment.
Exactly. That's it.
So, Doc, we are wanting to take this definition apart maybe a piece at a time. God physically removes. Let's talk about that first.
Well, when we consider each of the steps, God physically removes. Well, God's going to take whoever it is. He physically removes those people to whom he declares to be righteous. See, there has to be a qualification here for the person to be under God's divine protection, and that is righteousness.
Righteousness, okay.
And then the third one, outside of his impending judgment. In other words, judgment is going to hit, it's definite. But before God blows the boom, he takes those people whom he declares to be righteous and puts them outside of his impending judgment because they are righteous. And because we also know God can't touch a place where there is righteousness. He cannot pass judgment on any place that has righteousness in it, because then it wouldn't make him a righteous judge.
Right.
You know, why punish me if I've done nothing wrong? So, because of this, everyone in this last and final rapture, everyone has to be removed and put somewhere else, since the whole of the earth is going to be judged. And because all of the righteousness has now been removed, God can pour out his cup of wrath upon the whole of the earth. Now, probably my favorite example would be the events of Sodom and Gomorrah. We learn more about a rapture there than just about any other place in the Bible. And there are hidden, if you want to call it, mysteries that are so obvious that we just read it and we pass over these things. We know that two angels came down in chapter 19, I believe it is, here, find the events of the two angels going down to Sodom to meet up with Lot.
Right.
They just finished visiting Abraham. There was three to begin with, one of them being, I'm convinced, Jesus Christ. And those two angels went to the city of Sodom. And they told Lot that God had had it with the wickedness of this place. And to sum it up, they basically gave him the evening to gather up his son-in-laws, his family, and any of his friends. You will be out of here by sundown tomorrow. That's all you've got. And because Lot was carrying, I think he was just trying to keep grabbing as many people as he could, because he knew the place was going to be destroyed, that he just kept trying. Finally, the angels grabbed Lot by the hand, his wife, his daughter-in-laws, and just dragged him out of the city. And they explained to him, and this is where it gets interesting. They explained that because you're here, we can't touch the place. So what was there about Lot that prevented the hand of God from raining down judgment upon Sodom and the entire plains? Find out in a second. So they bring him outside of the city.
Right.
And they're told, flee to the mountains and don't look back. Well, Lot is up there in age. He's in his 80s, 90s right about now. And he said, I can't make it that far. Besides that, the mountains, there are bad people up there. They'll kill us.
Mm-hmm.
And so Lot counted and said, tell you what, there's a city down the road. It's a small city. It's not too big, but it's down the road. It's called Zoar. I can make it there, And the angel said another interesting thing here. He said, because thou hast declared Zoar, and you're going to go live in it, it will be spared. Why? This is the big question. Why couldn't Sodom be touched when Lot was there? And why is it now Zoar can't be touched because Lot was going to take up residence? Let's look at the three steps. Right. God physically removes. That's what he did with Lot and his family. Well, the angels literally had to drag him out because Lot was tarrying, but the point is they were taken out. Those whom he declares to be righteous. Now, not once in this story is it declared he's righteous until you go to the New Testament, where it tells us Lot was a righteous man before the Lord. God had declared him to be righteous. Now, wherever righteousness is found, God can't lower the boom. That's the problem. You see, Lot was the only righteous man in all of Sodom. And because he was still there, God couldn't lower the boom. So he had to remove him first. Mm-hmm. Now, again, we look at the story, we find out that Lot declares he's now going to move into Zoar. And the angel told him, to paraphrase all this, said, because you're moving into Zoar, it won't be touched. That tells us Zoar was on the hit list. Mm-hmm. I won't touch it now. Why? Because righteousness has now entered into Zoar. And it's only after, if you read the account, after he moved into Zoar, he made it to the city, only once he was there, did God lower the boom. And everything on that plain was completely wiped out. See, righteousness has to be, because righteousness is active, I should say, God won't touch anything. God won't touch the place. Mm-hmm. So long as one righteous person lives here in the United States of America, God can't touch it. This is how it's spelled out in the Bible. God physically removes those who declares to be righteous outside of his impending judgment. Judgment hit only after he was removed and safely tucked away. And there are other examples of this throughout the Word of God. God physically removes those who declares to be righteous outside of his impending judgment. And this next one is going to happen in the exact same pattern.
Now, let's go here to something else, which is the breaking of the seventh seal. And I want to read this to you, chapter 8, verses 1 through 6. When he'd opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. I saw 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given to him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came up with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire, cast it into the earth, and there were voices, thunders, and lightnings, and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. Now let me give you the imagery of what we see here in this book. Now again, we talked about it a little bit ago of how that some of the feasts are absolute pictures of, we see those pictures there in the book of Revelation. We talked about the Feast of Tabernacles and the palm branches just a moment ago. But here's another one. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, and he would burn incense upon, he would go into the Holy of Holies and offer the blood on the Ark of the Covenant. Now, Jewish history says it took about 30 minutes for that to happen. However, the priest also every morning offered incense upon the golden altar, which was all the prayers of the Jews and non-Jews alike, people that believed in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their prayers would come to the temple over here, and when the priest would burn the incense, it would come up, the smoke would come up, and the words of their prayers would come up to God in heaven. Now, this angel in the book of Revelation is at the golden altar. This is the golden altar in heaven. And I believe this angel is Christ himself. And let me explain why. Only a priest could touch the golden altar, and only a priest could offer incense. In the Old Testament time, there was a king that offered incense, and he came down with leprosy, and God judged him. I believe this is the imagery of Jesus Christ, our heavenly high priest, who comes to the altar in those linen garments, and he's offering up the incense, which are all the prayers of the saints. Now, in the prayer of the saints, this is important you understand this, is the prayer of, "Oh God, how long will you not judge us of those who are slain our blood on the earth?" So now God is going to take all the prayers of those martyrs, all the prayer. See, by that time in heaven, there's no more prayers to be answered. You're there, so you forget prayer. You know, it's going to be worship from that point on. There's no more prayers to answer. So all the prayers of all the saints are offered up at one time on the golden altar there in chapter 8, the breaking of that seal. And when that begins to happen, part of the prayer is, "How long will you not judge the earth, because they've shed the blood of the righteous?" And the angel takes the censer with the fire and throws it off of the altar into the earth. And that gives the right for God Almighty to then bring his judgment to the individuals who are on earth. Now, we do know that according to some Jewish teaching and also early teaching, that Raphael was considered to be one of the angels of prayer, and Gabriel was supposed to be the angel over the altar. No Bible for that whatsoever, as far as to say that, but that was according to some Jewish tradition there. But I believe this was Christ himself. Now, the angel mixes the incense with all the prayers of the saints. Now, on the Day of Atonement, now this is important you hear this, on the Day of Atonement, which is a picture of the 30 minutes of silence in heaven. I've had so much fun with that 30 minutes of silence in heaven. You know, the 30 minutes of silence in heaven. Now, wait a minute. I mean, there's always seraphims praising God. The 4 living creatures are praising God. The elders are occasionally praising God. Heaven has always worshiped God. There's never been silence before. But here, there's 30 minutes of silence. Do you know why? Because on the Day of Atonement, when the priest went into that holy place to offer the sacrifice and come out, it took about 30 minutes to do so. This is a Day of Atonement imagery where God is not judging the church. He's not judging heaven. He's not judging the saints. He's getting ready to send judgment to the earth.
It's a fundamental fact. Planets spin. Our solar system was born 4.5 billion years ago from a spinning cloud of gas and dust. As they formed, the planets borrowed some of that early spin, and they've kept most of it going to this day. At our equator, the Earth is turning more than 1,000 miles an hour. The Earth is gradually slowing down, about 2 seconds every 100,000 years. But today, that slowdown is going to speed up. What would happen to our oceans, our continents, the air we breathe? What would happen to us?
Nice one. James, you going in?
No, I should be there for 9.
Nearly 1,200 miles away in Chicago, the small time difference that goes unnoticed by many.
Come here, you.
But in fact,
Show me what you got.
slowing the Earth's spin has set an unstoppable chain reaction in motion. We periodically adjust our clocks to keep them in sync with Mother Nature. The days grow longer, but it happens very slowly. We have time to adjust. But what if 9 a.m. is suddenly dark? What if midnight is bright? What if our fixed ideas about time became unstuck?
Scientists have confirmed an erratic reduction in the Earth's rotation. Some are even suggesting it will stop spinning in as little as 5 years. If it does, the results will be disastrous. Scientists are predicting no country will be spared.
On day 1, the change in the speed of our rotation is practically unnoticeable, about half a mile an hour. But the results are dramatic. At Miami International Airport, the first sign of trouble.
Miami Tower, American 553 just turned on final.
Most commercial aircraft navigate with the help of GPS. GPS relies on a series of satellites, which tell an aircraft where it is. One major component of that system is time. Clocks on the satellites are in almost constant contact with the ground. The U.S. government sets time using atomic clocks, the most accurate in the world. The slowing Earth does nothing to knock these clocks out of sync. But the ground bases the satellites communicate with are not where the satellites assume they'll be. GPS doesn't expect the Earth's spin to change so dramatically. The slowing Earth throws the carefully calibrated system out of whack. The effects are catastrophic.
Tower, American 721, aborting approach. Repeat, aborting.
Computers try to land the planes far from airports. Now, hundreds of thousands of lives are at risk as pilots around the world suddenly discover their navigation systems don't work. In this savage, changing world, the weather is increasingly unpredictable. The rotation of the Earth creates constant patterns of east-moving winds in the northern hemisphere and west-moving winds in the southern. This is called the Coriolis effect. The Coriolis effect, caused by spin, controls weather, and it's gone. Now, storms are increasingly predictable. Reduced spin produces a more stable weather pattern. But there are still wild temperature swings between the hot days and cold nights.
Down all the way to the roots and the stuff in the back.
And this stable weather means less precipitation.
Yeah, one more.
Rain mostly falls far out on the oceans, without wind to blow storms inland. The world's spin has slowed by nearly 8 miles an hour. And the chain reaction gathers speed.
Commercial aviation has been reduced to essential services only, with a record 470 accidents worldwide.
More than 2.25 billion passengers fly commercially every year. But now, as safety concerns grow, flights are canceled. Americans also make more than 10 billion trips on buses and trains annually. Now, that number soars as airline passengers look for other ways to travel. Time is the first problem on an Earth that's slowly losing its spin. But there's a new, even more critical problem. The oceans. Our planet bulges. It's fatter in the middle than at the poles. Our spin is one of the forces that keeps the water in place on top of the equator. But as that force weakens, the oceans begin to move. Seas start flowing away from the bulging equator toward the poles. More than 300 million cubic miles of water are on the move. Northern places like the Canadian Arctic are the canary in the coal mine. 3 months after the Earth begins to slow down, water creeps over the Arctic shores like an overflowing bathtub.
Sea levels continue to rise. The Canadian government has ordered a full-scale evacuation of the Arctic.
And there's another dangerous effect on a slowing Earth. As the sea levels change, the very air we breathe is changing too. Our atmosphere is evenly spread across the planet, and it rotates in sync with the Earth. Now, with our spin slowing, the atmosphere follows the oceans flowing toward the poles. Among the first hit are cities in the tropics, including Rio, Mumbai, and Singapore. It's getting increasingly hard to breathe here. Further north, cities at higher elevations are also beginning to struggle. In the United States, people climbing in Colorado experience the effect dramatically. Altitudes of 5,000 feet are now like breathing at 15,000. Humans can begin to experience altitude sickness at 8,000 feet. Without oxygen support or time to get used to thin air, 17,000 feet is the outer limit of survival.
Son!
In most of the United States, flooding and thin air are not yet taking lives. People are coping. But suddenly, all over the world, there's a new deadly problem. Earthquakes, where there have never been earthquakes before. The Earth has 3 layers: a molten core, a solid insulating mantle, and a hard outer crust. They all rotate together. But as our spin decreases, each layer slows at a different speed, unleashing massive friction. The Earth is literally ripping itself apart from the inside out. The waters off San Francisco are an area prone to earthquakes. But now, oceanographers here see evidence of seismic activity they've never seen before. Deep cracks in the ocean floor release intense heat. Dead fish killed by the blast float to the surface.
Volcanic activity in and around Chicago has shut down several major arteries. Experts are advising that anyone who can stay home today should do so.
Geological disasters are just one of the extreme effects of a slowing Earth. The moving oceans are just as wild. Less centrifugal force means the oceans continue to flow from the bulging equator, steadily advancing to the poles. The ocean in the Arctic was once more than 15,000 feet deep. Now, it's more than 42,000. All that water has come from oceans to the south, and shallow areas, like the English Channel, dry out as the waters drain to the poles. For the first time in recorded history, Britain is part of mainland Europe, and Ireland is connected to England. You can walk from London to Paris. And it's not just Europe. Miami's famous beaches are now inland as the ocean surged to the poles. Cuba and Florida are connected by land, and Mexico is about a third bigger than it was.
The U.S. government advises that up to 25 million people in parts of the Southwest should evacuate.
The slowing rotation of Earth unleashes deadly friction between the Earth's outer layers and the inner molten core. Volcanoes and earthquakes have destroyed routes by road and rail.
Major highways across the country are closed, and those traveling by car are warned that there are no safe routes. Earthquakes, volcanoes, and violence are reported across the states, and those who must travel are advised that the government can offer little by way of help.
Retreating oceans leave major coastal cities high and dry. New York, Boston, and Halifax are far inland. Australia has formed a new continent with Indonesia, and Asia's shallow coast is no longer a coast at all. In just 4 months, Hong Kong and other major ports are dry. Shipping has come to a standstill all around the world. It's been just over a year since our rotation began to slow. We're now spinning about 210 miles an hour less than we used to. The face of the planet continues to change. The waters of the Earth are still moving. And a year since it became possible to walk from England to France, it will never be possible again. At first, the shallow areas around mainland Europe drained as the North Atlantic Ocean converged on the pole. But as the polar sea swells, the United Kingdom and much of Europe are swallowed by a new ocean. London is gone. Berlin, gone. Moscow, gone. Historical cities of Northern Europe, all at the bottom of a new sea. Hundreds of millions of people lived here. The entire Canadian North is also gone. Everything underwater. The country's biggest cities still remain: Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. But the massive oceans are still moving. In North America, survivors who are able to make the trip begin to arrive in Kansas. A college campus has been commandeered. Scientists are working to create a refuge in what they think is the safest place in the United States. No flooding, lots of air, minimal earthquakes.
I know everybody's excited.
But they face an enormous struggle. There's no food being delivered in this shattered world. Roads are all but impassable. What food they eat, they'll have to grow here. It's a disaster on a scale we've never had to deal with. The survivors who made it here are on their own. It will be a struggle, and they are the lucky ones. It's taken just 2.5 years, but now the spin of the Earth is just 200 miles an hour. More than 500 miles an hour slower than it once was. Entire countries are underwater. In others, the air is too thin to breathe. Survivors face another devastating consequence of the slowdown. All over the world, people desperately struggle to get enough sleep. Each day is now more than 2.5 days long. Each night is too. Humans are not wired to sleep in a world that's light for more than 60 hours straight. Welcome to a brand new world. A world where the Earth doesn't spin. Every night is 6 months long.
While here in Miami, we're being blanketed by snow again today.
Every day is 6 months too. And the planet is scorched by a relentless sun.
Today's solar radiation index is extremely high.
It's a world where cities have been swallowed by the sea, and others all but deserted. The air too thin to breathe. It's a world where we face a desperate future, struggling to survive on an alien landscape. This is the story of what could happen when the planet suddenly stops spinning. And how on Earth, changing one thing changes everything.
Say it ain't so, Joe. Say it ain't so.
But anyway, Gil, you and I have been bouncing around this concept of the Foucault pendulum. And it's important for us to understand things like the Foucault pendulum so that we can monitor things that are happening on the Earth, right?
Right. There's a definite effect that takes place during a full eclipse to the Earth here.
And why don't you tell us, first of all, how does a Foucault pendulum work and what does it prove?
Well, the Foucault pendulum was created by a French physicist to study the rotation of the Earth. The pendulum is constant, it just swings back and forth. And the ground underneath it is what rotates. Okay?
Yep.
And in some of these, you see these pendulums sometime in museums or observatories. There's a few. There's one in California, the Graham. It's the observatory.
You know, in fact, Paris has a famous one in Paris, I think, too.
Well, that's the one that he had created. Yeah.
Oh, so the one in Paris is actually the one that Dr. Foucault actually built. Awesome. Cool.
Well, he was in Paris whenever he was doing these experiments. He built a few of these because it got quite popular. Some of these will have these little pins set up where it's timed, you know, that whenever the Earth rotates, that it'll knock down the pins with X amount of timing in between. It's the pins. Well, this other physicist, Maurice Alice, discovered that during an eclipse that this process is interrupted, that there's a delay that takes place between the time of the eclipse and the next pin that drops. And sometimes it would miss it, actually.
Wow. So just a lunar eclipse, or sorry, a solar eclipse would do that. Just a regular one between the moon and the sun.
Right. Now, the astronomers don't want to touch this in a way because they can't explain it, because it cannot be explained by gravity. And the physicists have a better chance of explaining this. And what I'm going to point out is, this is my theory, and I'm pretty sure it will be proven out. This is what I would call a mini or micro version of Joshua's long day. What this does, it interrupts the solar winds enough to where it interferes with the solar winds hitting the Earth, which is what causes our spin, because it interacts with the magnetic field of Earth, and basically it causes us to spin, causes our core to spin.
If we go to the solar wind as a factor variable in the spin of the Earth, and we have a very slight slowdown when we have an eclipse with the moon, what you're claiming is that if we had a larger object, say a planet 7X, as you claim, that would cause even a longer delay or longer slowdown in the spin, if you will.
Yes, because we're in the plasma tail a much longer period of time.
Gotcha. So it's almost like we're suspended without anything driving our rotation.
Correct. It's just like a dimmer switch on a light. You're reducing the power less and less to where Earth finally comes to a complete stop for a short period of time.
Interesting.
And you end up with a 12-hour delay in Earth's rotation. This will happen again, it's mentioned in the book of Revelation. But the way that it's mentioned, it says that I will turn the day into night and night into day. And it's also listed in the Old Testament. Well, if that's true, then to prove out which one would be right, If the tail is pointing at Earth when it gets between us and the sun, and we're entering water vapor, then nothing should occur. But if we're entering a plasma tail, the plasma will stop electrical energy going into the north and south pole from the sun at a rate of 4.5 to 5.5% compounded hourly. Okay? Within 24 to 28 hours of entering it deeper and deeper into the plasma tail, Earth would come to a complete stop in its rotational spin. Okay? And then that would cause a 12-hour longer day as quoted in Joshua's long day.
Where in the Bible are we talking about?
Joshua's long day. Okay, Joshua's long day, there was a 12-hour extended daylight. On the opposite side, you had 12 extra hours of nighttime. Earth came to a stop, but the way it stopped was gradual, losing 4.5 to 5.5% compounded hourly, just like a dimmer switch. And it just came to a nice little stop. And he had a 12-hour extended day.
Again, I was curious about this statement because it's an account that many Christians debate as proof of the Bible, but have never really been able to prove through a model, at least not until Gill's research. Joshua's long day is one of the many accounts that are also referenced throughout many other cultures, and since Joshua's long day is historical, there should be accounts on the other side of the world of people who should have written about an extended long night. In fact, my research found that in New Zealand, the Maori people have a myth about their hero, Maui, who slowed the sun before it rose, while the Mexican annals of Cuauhtelan, the history of the empire of Cuacan and Mexico, records a night that continued for an extended time. There is also an urban myth that keeps popping up, is that NASA scientists were using computer models to check planetary positions and discovered that a day was missing from history. However, this alleged research was never published and has greatly been embellished over the years.
It happened before. It will happen again. It's just a question of when.
for that and so forth. But what I'd like to do then is go back into history, as it were, because I think the most interesting aspect of this whole story actually comes from the mythological record, the record of what our ancestors pinned down in terms of history and so forth, and what might actually have happened on this planet in the past. Because it seems that something has been happening in terms of catastrophe, just as you mentioned. It's a topic of tremendous upheaval. Something is what was happening here on this planet, and one of these areas then that we can find collaboration in, so to speak, is the Kolbrin Bible. But why don't you give us a little bit of an overview, I guess we can say, of the area of the Kolbrin Bible, where it came from, when it was dug out, so to speak, when we found it, and some of the things that are mentioned in the Kolbrin Bible.
Yes, the Kolbrin Bible was, and also I have to tell you up front, there's obviously, everyone has heard of Zechariah Sitchin,
right,
and his work on the Sumerian folklore, and yes, it's there. But, we're looking at, we're going to say, well, you have Sitchin, and, we actually have published an interview with Sitchin. I've dealt with him several times, and I'm very impressed with the man. He's very detail-oriented, very conscientious. But still the same, you have to be able to find some kind of, some way to corroborate what he's saying. Yeah. And we started looking, and one of the other researchers on our group, fellow from Australia, said, I'm studying something called the Kolbrin. And it gives us that captive object. The Egyptians called it the destroyer, and the Celts called it the frightener. This text, the Kolbrin, which we now publish as the Kolbrin Bible. And I use the term Bible to honor the ancient Phoenicians, because before Rome destroyed the Phoenician Empire, it was really a marvelous culture, seafaring culture. And they're the ones that really got this thing to a point where you could even see it today. And what it tells us in these ancient accounts that were written about the same time as the Torah, or the Old Testament, was being written after the Exodus. And what the Egyptians tell us in the Egyptian part of it, that's the first part of the Kolbrin Bible. The second part, the Celtic part, was written just in the years after the death of Jesus. And so it really does follow time-wise the Old and New Testament, and it's about the same size. What the Egyptians said was that this object was responsible for the sinking of Atlantis. It was responsible for the Great Deluge, which we know as the story of Noah's flood.
Well, the Book of Manuscripts, the Kolbrin Bible, is an ancient text, dates back approximately 3,600 years. It was written after the Exodus. It's actually a compilation of two books, the Bronze Book from the Egyptians and the Coal Book from the Celts. The Bronze Book was originally, in its first incarnation, called the Great Book.
Then God caused a sign to appear in the heavens, so that men should know the earth would be afflicted, and the sign was a strange star. The star grew and waxed to a great brightness, and was awesome to behold. It put forth horns and sang, being unlike any other ever seen. These were days of ominous calm, when the people waited for they knew not what. The days of stillness were followed by a time when the noise of trumpeting and shrilling was heard in the heavens. The people will scatter in madness. They will hear the trumpet and battle cry of the destroyer. They will seek refuge within dens in the earth. Terror will eat away their hearts, and their courage will flow from them like water from a broken pitcher. They will be eaten up in the flames of wrath and consumed by the breath of the destroyer.
There's been a lot of buzz over the last few weeks about strange sounds being heard in the atmosphere. People around the world and here at home have reported hearing some bizarre noises.
Some strange noises heard around the world the last few weeks has people buzzing, especially on YouTube. Clips posted from Arizona to England and right next door in Manitoba, all showing folks alarmed by what sounds like a noise straight out of a science fiction flick. Some strange noises heard around the world the last few weeks.
There is now audio proof.
All over the globe, people are recording extremely loud sounds coming from the sky. In many instances, these ominous noises sound like someone is blowing a trumpet. In addition to being heard at locations all over the United States and Canada, these sounds have also been recorded in Germany, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Sweden, England, Costa Rica, Ukraine and France. This phenomenon is now really starting to get a whole lot of attention. Just within the last month, there have been headlines about it in major news sources all over the planet. Of course, there are many scientists that insist that there must be a rational explanation for these strange sounds. Some theories have suggested fracking, rock bursts, venting of high-pressure gas, atmospheric pressure or the natural background noise of our planet as the causes of these sounds. But so far none of those theories have been proven.
Thank you. When Jesus was being asked about the signs of his coming, his answer in one case was almost a matter of rebuking the people who were asking him. You didn't know the day of my visitation, almost as if you should know. We now know in retrospect that it was made very clear. So many years after the decree for the rebuilding of the temple. So, consequently, if in the scriptures he tells us when his first coming is, why wouldn't he tell us the second coming? He gives us signs for the first coming, which most people ignored, over 200 of them. There are many, many signs for the second coming. Most prophecy experts focus on world events, but as you said, there are celestial events as well. In fact, one of the things Christ said is that the heavens would be shaken as a fig tree, an untimely fig tree losing its figs as the winds shake it. So let's look toward the heaven from that regard. We should see precursor events in the heavens for his coming, just like we see precursor events right now here on earth, both religiously, politically, economically, and socially happening on earth. So let's turn our attention to the heavens. But before we do that, I want to talk about the governments of the world, because they see something that the general public typically does not see. In the last few years, the governments of the world have been collecting and storing seeds, and they're doing it at neck-breaking speeds. Massive seed vaults are appearing all over the planet. The most famous one was in Norway, where they took an ice island 600 feet off the ocean floor, dug right into granite, and have a massive seed vault, basically in cold storage. Now, and it's protected, by the way, with armed guards 24/7. Now, everybody takes notice of that, but they don't realize that there are now over 1,000 seed vaults just in the last 5 years that were created by governments of the world. Why the rush to create them now? Second thing we're seeing is that governments of the world, as you mentioned earlier, Russia, United States, and various other countries are building underground, not bunkers, but cities, small cities out of rock under the ground. For what purpose? NORAD announced just this year that they were transporting, at an incredible cost to the taxpayer, a lot of high-tech military equipment into the Cheyenne Mountains to, and I quote, to protect it from the possibility of a natural EMP pulse. What could be natural? So we'll get into what could cause a natural EMP pulse. In other words, they're preparing for something. And I actually think when they released that article saying that they were doing this to preserve electronic equipment from a natural EMP pulse source, I think it actually was a mistake. I don't believe they intended to tell the public that. One of our greatest fears in wartime is, we've all heard the scenario of an EMP, a nuclear weapon being detonated above the United States, shutting down our power grid. Effectively, that is not actually accurate. The EMP pulse from a nuclear explosion will shut down a 500-mile radius. You need several of them for the power grid of the United States. It would still shut us down, essentially, but it wouldn't shut down the whole planet. A natural EMP pulse would shut down the entire planet. In fact, depending on how strong it would not only shut down all the power grids on the planet, kill all communications, destroy the alternators in your car, just blow them up so that nothing moves that's motorized. The satellites in orbit would be rendered ineffective. All of our communications would be down, essentially. And it would be decades before we'd bring it back up. Now, if this event happens, what is the scenario through the rest of Revelation would actually talk about events that do not have electricity or technology associated with them. And we find it very interesting that in the end, with the Battle of Armageddon, they arrive on horses and chariots, and basically by landmass, there's no missiles, there's no airplanes flying. They all converge in the Valley of Megiddo. You know, they're coming the old-fashioned way. 2,000 years ago, the armies are converging to do battle. He set everything in motion. Let me give you a quick example. Suppose an asteroid hits the Earth. Did God grab that asteroid and throw it to Earth? No. He intended for it to hit it. He set that asteroid in motion when he created the heavens and the earth that long ago. So everything, essentially, unrepentant man who does not know God will see everything as a natural cause and effect. So to them, it is a natural effect, but God set it in motion at the creation of the world. So what did he send in motion? Let's look at this verse more carefully. The source, the nearest source, is the sun, plasma from the sun, which is what the scientists are starting to theorize is going to happen from the sun. It's going to generate a CME burst, coronal mass ejection, which means a chunk of the surface of the sun itself, not X-ray emissions, is going to blast off the sun and hit the earth. Now, if that were to happen, it would have a viscous, liquidy type of feel at 6,000 degrees. minimum 6,000, some estimate up to 10,000, by the time it comes to the Earth's atmosphere. With a pressure wave moving through the atmosphere, you now introduce the minus 150 degrees from outer space just outside our atmosphere to the stratosphere, which is saturated with moisture, instantly crystallizing all the moisture in the upper atmosphere. As the pressure wave moves through it, it compacts that ice into hail and ice. Now, so here's what we see. And there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. Where's the blood? As it moves through the atmosphere, at any given moment in the United States, there are about 54,000 airplanes flying in the air. They all have aluminum skins. The skins vaporize at about 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, we're at 6,000 minimum. We have vaporized all the planes and all the people in the planes and every bird and insect in the air. There's your mingled with blood. Now it continues on its way and it hits the earth. Third part of the trees were burnt up and all the green grass. The key part here for me is all the green grass. A liquid would flow on the ground and go into every crevice and destroy everything.
You're talking about a plasma.
Plasma.
This ejection from the sun would be,
yes.
It's not gas, but it's a state of matter called plasma.
Fourth state.
Which is very dense and very hot, and it would be like liquid, you've called it liquid fire, which is absolutely horrifying to me to think about that.
Yeah.
But when it comes, it would literally hit the earth with an impact and spread out.
It would spread out, and hence all the green grass was burned up. In John's vernacular, this one sentence is a perfect description of a CME blast hitting the earth. Now, we mentioned earlier that the governments of the world know something that we don't know, right? Sure. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they suddenly, all the governments immediately started creating seed vaults. They started escalating the building of underground bunkers in cities, and at the same time started putting stuff into caves. For instance, the United States just announced that NORAD is collecting all of this and putting it back in the Cheyenne Mountains. What did they see? We now know what they saw. Last year in July, NASA announced that 2 years prior, January of 2012, there was a CME blast that came out of the sun. A CME blast that literally would have wiped out all life on Earth. Far more intense than what this shows. The blast missed Earth by 3 weeks. It was actually 3 weeks behind Earth. It shot past Earth. If Earth was 3 weeks back in its orbit, we wouldn't be here today. But of course that can't happen because God doesn't want that to happen.
They're fiery judgments.
They are fiery judgments.
And it's not like unknown fire. It's fire that we can actually see today using scientific instrumentation.
Right, and the governments of the world are looking at it. The people are basically ignorant of it because the information that's being released from the governments and the space agencies that have the satellites is far and few in between. But when they release it, then we know in retrospect afterward what it is they were seeing and why they were probably acting in the way they are. For example, the European Space Agency has a satellite network system called SWARM. SWARM monitors the magnetic fields of the Earth. And a year ago, in 2014, they announced that the Earth's magnetic field is starting to collapse. It is getting thinner and accelerating its collapse at 10 times the rate their worst projections had indicated. It is the magnetic field of the Earth that protects the planet from solar emissions. If it wasn't for the magnetic field of the Earth, the solar winds would vaporize our planet in just a matter of years. So with this magnetic field becoming weaker, and we now see that the sun is generating more X-class emission flares than it ever has been, and it is now shooting off CME blasts in random locations spherically. Now this is starting to make more sense. It's basically saying one of these will hit us. The pole shift, as we talked about in the last time I was here with you, just happens at the beginning of the sixth seal, and now we have the fiery judgments. The second one happens almost immediately after the first one. Let me go ahead and read that. And the second angel sounded, and there was a great mountain burning with fire and was cast into the sea. And the third part of the ocean of the sea became as blood, and the third part of the creatures within the sea, which were in the sea that had life, died. The first theory, the one that is most proliferated, is that it's an asteroid that hits the ocean. Well, there's a lot of problems with that theory. First of all, asteroids aren't shaped like great mountains. It's a great mountain. Secondly, they're not burning in space. Third, if an asteroid that big hit the Earth, it would actually crack the Earth in half and destroy most all life on Earth. That's not the event that is occurring. It says there is a great mountain cast into the sea with fire. It's still burning after it's in the sea, and it kills all 1/3 of the sea life. If you look at it from a scientific viewpoint, the only thing that makes sense, again, mankind will see it as a natural event, is a supervolcano under the ocean. A massive volcano is cast into the sea from under the ocean. A supervolcano which spews lava, fire. The ash and the lava pollute the ocean, 1/3 of the ocean, killing 1/3 of all the sea life, doesn't affect the rest of the planet.
The cataclysmic disaster that defies belief. Rising from the sea, bringing death and destruction to millions. At odds of just 1,000 to 1, this could be the next apocalyptic disaster. And we already know where the danger will come from. 3,000 miles away. On La Palma, in the Canary Islands, off the African coast. The island is the tip of a huge undersea volcano. But the threat to millions of us in America doesn't come from a volcanic eruption. The real danger is worse. A mile-high tsunami with the power to cross an ocean.
When I look at La Palma, I see a disaster waiting to happen. Something very unusual is happening here. All the rocks on the western side have moved down by about 6 feet compared to the rocks on the east side. The whole of this side of the island is moving down and towards the sea, and the volcano seems to be almost splitting in half.
And that's the danger to America. When half an island falls into the ocean, it makes a splash big enough to start a tsunami. 4:55 p.m. local time. La Palma volcano erupts. Passes the point of no return. Steam pressure inside the mountain splits the island. 1,250 trillion tons of rock slide into the ocean. A tsunami wave races across the Atlantic at 500 miles per hour, as fast as a jumbo jet. At 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, news breaks in the U.S. The death wave is just 8 hours away.
I have Citizens Band radio, and if there's an emergency, then I'm supposed to go to channel 9. And then they'll give us instructions from the city as far as what we're supposed to do for our neighborhood.
But there simply won't be enough time to evacuate a metropolis like New York.
Unfortunately, it's not a survivable event. You've got to have escape routes out of the city. And you're not going to be able to do it in a car if you wait too long, because the traffic is going to be enormous. So you're going to have to either move on foot, or you're going to have to move by bicycle, or you're going to have to move by public transportation. And get out as quickly as you can and find the highest area that you can find.
6:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The wave now stands 100 feet high.
You're talking about floodwaters that are going to move into the city, some places 40 miles inland. And in some areas in the city, you're going to see water levels that raise up almost to the top of this building.
From New York to Miami, the monster wave drowns the land up to 40 miles from the coast. $400 trillion worth of damage. Yet, when the waters recede, America's problems are just beginning.
that opens up and begs a question. 1/3 of the land mass, no matter how you read it in the original language, 1/3 of the land mass is vaporized by fire from this mass. The question is, which third? Let's take it seriously and get right down to, hard tacks. Which third? Revelation talks about the remaining 2/3 of land masses on this planet after this event. It talks about Russia, China, the kings of the East. It talks about Ethiopia, Africa. It talks about Europe. It talks about the Middle East. We know it's not that third. What's left? North and South America, which is approximately 1/3 of the landmass. So that includes the 850 million plus people on those land masses.
So the world is going to be basically recrafted in the day of the Lord.
Yes.
All of the Earth's tilt, the solar radiation, flooding, plate tectonics, everything is going to be juggled around in preparation for the kingdom age.
Yeah. For all intensive purposes, people who are non-believers on this earth will truly believe this is the end of the world, there is no more, because these events will happen in very quick succession.
So it's already given us indication what half is hit by fiery hail, as they call it, which is our way of saying meteor shower. When you look at the Earth as a globe, and you realize in modern only half of the Earth is hit because the other half that is shielded from the meteor bombardment, and only half of the Earth can be hit. So what half of the Earth has 1/3 of the continental crust? That is North and South America. Europe, Asia, and African continents, 2/3 of the continental crust.
Has the biblical locust, scorpion, spider, creature from the bottomless pit, are they starting to be released? Is this a precursor? What? I don't know. If you looked at the thumbnail of this video, you'll see the arm of Thomas J, and that doesn't look good. Matter of fact, it was just another night taking the trash out to the curb a few weeks ago in Chandler, Arizona, until Thomas J suddenly felt a pinch followed by the most excruciating pain of his life. He swatted off what looked like a creature, a species, a cross between maybe a scorpion and a spider.
What started as a painful bug bite has turned into a medical mystery for a family in Chandler. Tonight, they are sharing their journey in an effort to help others.
Well, a mysterious bug bite has doctors dumbfounded in Arizona.
I'm pretty dumbfounded too. Look at all this bruising. This is the arm of Thomas J. This is what it looks like 10 days after what experts believe was a bite from some sort of insect. He says he was taking out the trash when it happened. He did go to urgent care, but his arm continued to get worse.
Chandler man with a very strange bite is now a perplexing test case. Thomas J was taking out the trash when he says he got bit by something he had never seen before. And wow, look at his bruised arms you see here, pictures going viral tonight. It is still kind of a mystery as to what kind of creepy crawly bit or maybe stung him, but it is obvious and clear it was far too much for his body.
And as I glanced at it real quick, all of a sudden I just felt this excruciating pinch, this pressure, this bite or sting that happened and occurred, and immediately just swatted the bug off. There's still excruciating pain that's in the arm, and it moves from different places at different times.
What you're looking at is the aftermath of some sort of bug bite from 10 days ago. Thomas J says he was taking out the trash at his Chandler area home when it happened.
The bite itself was a circular bite, and it already had like a white sealed skin on top of it.
He told his wife Deanna, who immediately drew a circle around it. They watched and waited. His arm only got worse even after a trip to urgent care.
It doubled in size in an hour and a half.
Deanna says she started posting about it in her Living Chandler Facebook group, and the responses started rolling in.
One of the ladies right away said, call poison control. Other people said, get him to the ER. I mean, we had 100 people right away said, don't joke around, this is serious.
It's advice they heeded. The Chandler hospital they went to was stumped, so they sent them to a Phoenix one.
Toxicologist was in the room looking at him, and that's when they checked him and they said, no, that something's wrong. We need to try to figure this out. Started running blood tests, and it just never stopped for 3 days.
Because Thomas wasn't sure what bit him, treating him proved tricky, so they tried to narrow the possibilities.
It's like a camel spider, wind spider, sun scorpion, sort of that family.
But without knowing for sure, doctors erred on the side of caution, just taking biopsies, blood, and monitoring him.
Even though they might not be able to figure out what it was, they might be able to help other individuals as they learn from this situation.
Are you serious? What is this that bit Thomas J? Stung him, bit him? What is it? In just a few hours, this tiny circular transformed into a bruises that covered his entire arm. Matter of fact, Thomas J was transferred between multiple hospitals until he reached one with a toxicology department as doctors scrambled to diagnose the problem. For now, a few weeks after the bite or sting or whatever this was, he is stable and he awaits biopsy results as they still try to heal the arm. Jay and his wife say the care has been excellent and that they've received a lot of support through the community. What is it? And the Bible talks about a strange creature that will crawl out of the bottomless pit. In Revelation chapter 9, it says the fifth angel sounded and saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. He opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, and the smoke of a great furnace. The sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them were given power as the scorpions. So they were a different cross, a weird creature, something we haven't seen, a new species, similar to maybe what bit Jay. I don't know. And the scorpion of the earth, and they had power like scorpions, and they commanded them, okay, to bite men. As a matter of fact, it said that they were, and to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. It even says in verse 6 that in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And has Jay experienced the first scorpion bite of what will eventually plague the world as they crawl out of the bottomless pit?
Our entire continent threatened. The end of civilization. Deep under Yellowstone Park, a smoldering giant awakens. A super volcano. An area the size of Connecticut, more than 5,000 square miles, becomes a bubbling cauldron of superheated lava and toxic gas. An ash cloud 25 miles high blots out the sun. The end of America as we know it could start just like this. Across Yellowstone Park, the number of earthquakes steadily rises. The geysers and fumaroles grow more active. 2:53 p.m. 120 miles underground, a mass of molten rock as big as Los Angeles soars toward the surface. It's 1,500 degrees, enough to melt the surface rocks and set off dozens of earthquakes. Lava jets burst from 100 fissures all over the park. The eruption passes the point of no return. The scale of the coming blast defies comprehension. The eruption equals 1,000 Hiroshima atom bombs every second. 1,000 times the power of Mount St. Helens, ejecting 240 cubic miles of ash and red-hot lava, 10 times more than the volume of water in Long Island Sound. Within hours, the death zone covers a 600-mile radius from Yellowstone. In here, 9 of every 10 people die. And that's just the start. All aircraft are grounded as ash blankets 3/4 of the country. Across the continent, volcanic dust causes long-term and deadly lung damage.
It's going to basically envelop the entire planet because that ash is going to circle a planet with the jet stream. It's going to affect everything that we do on the planet. So this is as cataclysmic an event as they come. In terms of global geophysical events, this is the big one.
With an estimated death toll of more than 100 million. It could be the end of America. A Yellowstone supervolcano has erupted on average every 600,000 years. The last one was 640,000 years ago and counting.